Baby Boomer fans, we are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade. Grab your favorite malt or Green River, make sure you are wide awake, and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat. Greetings, everybody. Here we are in February already. And oh my goodness, it's, the winter is slowly passing us by. For some of us, we have sunshine. For some, it's fog. For some, it's snow. Who knows what will be next on the list? But knowing what we have for a chat today, it's going to be warm and cozy. So Jackie, introduce us, please.
And sunshiny, for sure. Mm-hmm. Okay, hello, viewers. I'd like to have you take a look at the purple banner below. And go to that site, www.whilethewindmillwatch.com. There you'll find a bit about the book, which you see in the upper right-hand corner, While the Windmill Watched, A Slice of Rural America in the 1950s. You'll also find out some things about the authors, where we might be speaking, where the book is sold, many vendors on our list, and on the upper right-hand corner, the 1950s Fun Chat. So you can look at all of those past. There are 126. This is the 126th one today. So there are many hours of viewing waiting for you if you wish. Okay, again, upper right-hand corner of the book, notice it has a little white dot on the bottom. And if you take a really close look at it, you'll see that it is an award that was given to While the Windmill Watched, the National Independent Press Award in the regional nonfiction category for the distinguished favorite. This was awarded in 2022, 1 year after the book was published in 2021. So let's begin.
Yeah.
So viewers, I've been talking to you about the book, and now I'm going to talk to you about the Fun Chat. If you've been following the Fun Chat, you may have noticed that we've sometimes deviated from our original criteria. We do like and appreciate tangents. So we have Michelle Andersen here this morning. She wasn't alive in the 1950s. However, she will provide some worthwhile information pertaining to that decade. Michelle was born in the 70s and lived most of her growing up in eastern Iowa, where her father was a minister and her mom was a stay-at-home mom. Michelle earned a BA in music education from Northwestern College in Orange City, Iowa, and has taught for 3.5 years. She was a church music director while her husband was working on his master's degree when they had 2 children, and then later, most of the time at home when there were 4 children. So during this period of her life, she gave private piano lessons and continued to play piano and organ in the church. But another position changed her life as when she was asked to serve in her local library, being a member of the board opened her eyes to the current services, as well as the possibility of future services offered by the community library. So today, Michelle is an Iowa certified library director who is employed by the fully accredited Atlantic, Iowa Public Library. So Michelle, we welcome you to our 1950s Fun Chat.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Good morning. So let's begin about hearing a little history of the Pack Horse Library Project, perhaps something that has not been on people's minds when you think of a library.
Right. So this was, this is actually a little earlier than the 1950s, but I think it was in the 30s. So it was part of the recovery efforts from the Great Depression that they discovered many people, especially those living in the mountains of Appalachia, didn't have access to reading materials. And so part of the Works Progress Administration, I believe is the organization it was under, was bringing library materials to these remote locations, whether they be villages or clusters of houses, by pack mule or horseback. So you can imagine the excitement that families would have when they saw the book lady or the book woman coming across the ridge of the mountain or up a ravine on her horse, bringing them reading materials.
How fun would that have been? And I know there are books out there that tell the story of these pack horse librarians.
Right. So if you've heard of The Book Woman of Troublesome Creek by Kim Michelle Richardson, that was the first book that really talked about the pack horse libraries. And then there was a second book, The Book Woman's Daughter, which was released maybe a year or two ago, that continues that story and is set in the 1950s as her daughter has grown up and continues on.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, going into the 1950s and then even talking about Atlantic, Iowa, the Carnegie Library that is there and that I have so often patronized. Tell us about how those Carnegie Libraries came about.
Yeah. And again, excuse me while I find my notes.
That's fine.
So yes, Atlantic's library is a Carnegie library. We were awarded $12,500 to build a library in 1902, and the library was completed in 1903. I did a little research for you because that's what a good librarian should do. So between 1892 and 1917, over 100 communities in Iowa sought money from Carnegie to build public libraries. Ultimately, 99 accepted the money, and those communities built 101 public libraries. In addition to public libraries, there were academic libraries, and I was thinking there was two different categories, maybe just academic libraries.
Right.
Iowa has the 6th largest number of Carnegie libraries in the state.
And how were those towns, those areas selected by Andrew Carnegie to have a library?
Well, I don't know the whole process. I know that there were 2 people who petitioned him to bring the library to Atlantic. And then the stipulation was the city had to provide land, and the city had to agree to fund the library with 10% of his building donation annually. So Atlantic got $12,500 to build a library, and then they had to fund it with $1,250 annually. Okay. And so we do have some records of people donating to give money to purchase the land where the library sits. And I think I have to remember if I saw the ordinance or whatever where they said where the city agreed to fund the library. Okay. But there's a really great website. It's called Carnegie Libraries in Iowa. And that there's a professor out at the University of Iowa from their library department that keeps that up to date and has information on every Carnegie library. In fact, from that website, I saw that 48 public library buildings that were donated by Carnegie are still in use as libraries.
Do you happen to know worldwide how many that is?
I did not do that research. I don't know what the worldwide number is. I just know that Iowa had a lot, 6 most. And then that of those 99, 48 are still in use as libraries.
That's good.
Is the architecture similar then with each Carnegie Library? Is that how we know that it's a Carnegie Library?
Right. So Carnegie was a believer in education raised your level in society. So a lot of those Carnegie libraries are 2-story libraries, and you go up steps to get in the door, which is why here in Atlantic, the door that faces Poplar Street was the original door. It's not the door we use now as our main entrance, but why you see that traditional 2-story go up the steps to get in the door, and then oftentimes go up the steps to once you get inside the door as well, because it was raising your awareness, raising your place in the world when you were educated and you were well read.
And did they have Greek columns in the front?
Usually. Yeah. Usually. And we have a beautiful library. So I'm just going to go ahead and just plug, come visit the Atlantic Public Library because we have some beautiful columns inside. We have some beautiful fireplaces. They no longer work, but just the woodwork and the trim is just beyond compare.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Did original Carnegie libraries have a children's section and adult section? Or how was that divided or distributed?
Yeah, I'm not sure that it was originally. I know that by the 50s here in Atlantic, they were doing work in what we would call the basement to create more room for the children. So I think about that time is when our youth collection, the books that were intended for children, were moved downstairs and activities were held downstairs. When we did a renovation in the 90s, we moved our main entrance to the side of the building so that you actually, when you come in the main doors, you're entering on the lower level and right into the youth services.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Tell us about the books that were popular in the 1950s.
Oh, well, again, I come prepared.
Oh, good.
I did some research, and some of the most well-known books that you would still be familiar with today are things like Catcher in the Rye, Fahrenheit 451, Lord of the Flies, even Old Man in the Sea by Ernest Hemingway.
Oh, yes.
But maybe you were younger in the 1950s and you read things like Charlotte's Web or Chronicles of Narnia, Flowers for Algernon, or even Dr. Seuss was making his start. So
really?
How the Grinch Stole Christmas and some of those beloved Dr. Seuss titles just getting published in the 1950s.
Was it popular back then for a book to be made into a movie?
Oh, heavens, no.
Oh, okay. Okay.
No, I mean, not from what I know. Now I'm feeling like I answered that really quick. But no, I don't think that was something that was a standard thing. I think a lot of the movies of that era were adapted from plays or musicals or were new scripts. I don't think they did a lot of book crossover.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
But that could but Walt Disney did some of that with his movies.
Sure. Well, and they took what we would call maybe fairy tales or stories that wouldn't have any copyright infringements and took those stories and made those into movies. So that's true. Yeah.
Yeah. That's
well, I think about books that I read in the 50s. And of course that was, I was born in 1950, so I didn't read a lot of
Dick and Jane.
Anyway, yeah. Well, beyond Dick and Jane, but it was the Boxcar Children. That was huge. And I think Michelle when did those Boxcar Children books become available for children?
Yeah, they started publishing Boxcar Children books in the 20s.
Oh my.
So I did a quick Google search on that, and I think it was 24 is what it said was when they first started publishing.
Okay. Jackie, what books do you remember from our Minokan School Library?
Well, I remember reading Trixie Belden, but that might have been in the 60s. And from our school library, I was fascinated by the cover of the Zane Grey ones. They were beige and blue and red with gold lettering. So that's what drew me to those. And our library in school was very limited. Mm-hmm. I also, Caddy Woodlawn was one of my favorites. Do you remember that one?
I just remember the name. I suppose I read it at one time.
Yeah. How about you, Michelle?
Yeah.
It's kind of a sort of like a Little House on the Prairie book. And then, of course, Laura Ingalls Wilder's, all her series, Little House. So those are I think, the main ones. So we've talked about anything more you want to say about the 50s books?
Well, I know Michelle wasn't born in the 50s, but do you recall having read books as a child, maybe that had been published in the 50s?
I don't know. I remember trying to read the Chronicles of Narnia, and I just didn't get fantasy. So I read one and I was like, yeah, not for me. I know I read a lot of well, as I was getting closer to my teen years, I read a lot of like Jeanette Oakes books,
Oh,
and
sure.
Brock and Bodie Taney were big in the 80s. And I remember reading a lot of that. But I just remember we would take these family vacations, and whenever we would get to a bookstore, my father being a minister, he was always looking for books as resources for preparing his sermons. And so we were always allowed to find a book and pick out a book. I just don't remember that I stuck with any one series or any one author. But yeah, my house had books all over the place.
That's wonderful.
So we were talking about books. Now, how about library services changing from the 50s, as that would have been history for you, up till now?
Right. So I did happen to find, I did some archives looking, and I found some stats from 1952 for the Atlantic Public Library. And in 1952, the library owned 13,000 books and had a circulation, or the number of checkouts, of just over 40,000. And they had 2,925 borrowers. So that's how many library cards people. And so I found that to be very interesting. I did not find what their budget was, which I think is interesting because it's budget season right now. So we're planning for next year's budget.
Michelle, how did one go about acquiring a library card in the 1950s?
I think you just walked in and requested it. Now, today we ask for a photo ID, but I'm not sure that was true in the 1950s. I think in a community like ours, you were known and people knew that you were from here, and we'd be glad to give you a card.
Did you have to have an Atlantic address?
I am not sure on that.
Okay.
Today we have some sharing agreements in place where, as long as you live in our state and you live in a place that has a public library, we can issue you an Atlantic Public Library card. But I'm kind of thinking that in the 50s, you wouldn't have as much travel from town to town as you do today. So, I mean, we have people that, are maybe from Marshalltown or Cedar Rapids that have family here that have come in to get a library card, and we'll occasionally see that they've been here and checked something out. And I doubt that was true in the 1950s.
Sure. When did Bookmobile start?
Well, let's just say Bookmobile started with those pack horse librarians.
Oh, true.
Yeah.
They were bringing library materials to your door. And we don't have a Bookmobile, but we do have what we call our home delivery service. So if you can't come to the library, once a month, we have volunteers who will bring library materials to your door, so that you're still benefiting from the resources in the community.
Oh, nice.
Do you take them to your pioneer home, old people's home, your care facilities, whatever they're called there?
Yes. So I think we have 3 different facilities here in town, and 2 get deliveries every month. The third one has people flex. Staff is like changing all the time. And so we've tried to get into that third one a couple of times. And every time we connect with a staff member who's willing to work with us, the next thing we know, that person's gone, and we can't, we have no one to contact again. So yes, that's part of it. But then we also, we deliver to in-home daycares. So they can have resources to use with their daycare clients. But yeah, we bring a library of materials that are just shared in a building, as well as materials that are for individual people, so that we select materials that they've requested.
A library, libraries used to have, or maybe some do, fines for overdue books. How did they go about establishing what the amount of a fine would be? And is that still in practice today?
Well, those are all good questions. Where shall I start? I think the idea of that daily fine for overdue materials was just to be a deterrent so that that book would come back so that the next person could have it. I think it probably started out as a penny or two a day for each day it was overdue. I know my library, when I was growing up, I think it was like 3 or 5 cents a day if something was past due. So if you're 2 days late, you owed them 6 cents. Okay.
Yeah. And that was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal, but it was a deterrent so that people would want to bring their materials back on time. There is definitely a trend in library services today where we don't want to penalize you for keeping a book a few extra days. Atlantic is fine free. We don't charge a daily overdue fee. The only time you would incur a fee is if the material was lost or damaged, and so we can't put it back on our shelf. And I think that's important because the clients, the members, I don't know what we want to call them, but a lot of times people who make the most use of the library probably have the least resources to pay those fees. And so in equity of service and equity to access of information, we don't want to put roadblocks in their way.
Our library has found that many years ago, the fine was deleted, but they get more materials back because, like 1 month later, here's this book found behind the sofa.
Right.
And no fine, just they put it in the Dropbox. They don't even have to come and face a librarian to feel guilty. Put it in the Dropbox, and that's that. So that's the point.
We might make them feel a little guilty.
If you put it in the Dropbox, it's just, oops, it appeared.
Yeah. But and we say that too. People will bring in books all the time and they'll say, "Oh, I think I'm late with this." And I said, "Well, that's okay. We're just happy it's back."
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
When in the 1950s era, there was the card catalog. And tell us about the cataloging system then, and what is any changes? How is it metamorphosed into something different today?
It absolutely has. So I even remember in my school days learning how to use the card catalog. Every material had at least 3 cards, 1 card that was filed by author, 1 card that was filed by title, and 1 card that was filed by subject. Now, if a book had multiple subject headings, you would have multiple cards for each subject heading. And then you had to use that card catalog in that way. So you had to know, am I looking for a title? Am I looking for a subject in order to find that in alphabetical order? I think it's much easier today. So now we have an online listing of everything that we own. And not only that, but our online catalog, we still call it a catalog, will search and bring up results from some of our digital services as well. So things that people have access to download directly to their device will appear when they do a search in our catalog.
Have you found that some of the services that you offered are fading out? And what I'm referring to is books on tape or large print books, anything such as that?
No, in fact, if anything, it's getting easier to access those. I was just looking this morning at some statistics, and we offer 2 different downloadable library services. And just from one of our library services, we had 396 audiobooks downloaded. And that's really high for us. Especially when you consider that people walking out of the building with audiobooks, whether that's an MP3 player that's preloaded or with audio CDs, it's usually between 70 and 80 checkouts that are walking out of the building. But here we're seeing, 3 to 4 times as many being downloaded just in one digital service. So it's an important option to have, and I think it's easier to access those because you can access them from anywhere you have internet.
That's right.
Did all this? When did all the transition come about from a card catalog to now we're going into online services?
Well, we've been our catalog has been online for quite a few years. I would say for sure by the 90s, if not even in the 80s, that, we're putting barcodes on materials and checking out by scanning that barcode and the database, matching up the user with the item. Now, I think more recently, the ease of use of downloadable, ebooks, downloadable audiobooks, music collections, TV and movie collections has really taken off, I would say probably just in the last 10 years.
All right. Okay.
At least from what I see locally.
Yes.
Now,
go ahead,
I was going to say, on average, how many new cards do you issue monthly?
Give or take 30, I would say. It just depends on what's happening. We have in 2022, we had about the same number of borrowers as was registered in 1952, which I find very interesting.
Yes.
Because the population here in Atlantic has definitely dropped. So I don't know if that's more people from outside Atlantic that are using our library and having cards, or if it's just more families having individual cards rather than sharing a family account. I mean, it could be either way.
Right.
But I did find that really interesting, that the actual number of borrowing accounts really hasn't changed all that much in those 70 years.
Just the population.
When did interlibrary loan come to be part of the library service?
So let me just define what that is first, just in case somebody doesn't know. Interlibrary loan is where we can contact another library and borrow a material on your behalf and then bring it to our library so that you can use it. And it's been, again, I would say at least the 80s, if not earlier. I know it was harder to look up to see who owned what. Before we had online catalogs, because now we have a state platform we can go into. Our online catalog automatically updates and syncs with that state database once a month, and so it's automatically set to take out anything that's been removed from that state database and add anything that we've added to our collection to that state database. So it's really easy now to see, oh yeah, 32 libraries in Iowa own that title. We'll be able to get it for you.
Okay.
I know it wasn't that easy many years ago.
Yeah.
Is there a cost?
We do ask a nominal fee here. Not every library does, but just between the staff time it takes and sometimes we have to send it through the mail. So that helps us recoup some of that postage cost when we have to send items through the mail.
Okay.
In the 50s, and maybe that differed from what it is now, but was it the head librarian's responsibility for bringing in new books, or was there a designated person to do that, or how did the library become aware of new books that were out?
Yeah, I'm not real sure. I would think that when the Carnegie Library started here, there's only record of one librarian. So my guess is it was that librarian's responsibility to pay attention to what's new and what people are asking for. We still take requests from the public that if there's something that you'd like to read that we don't have, we'd be glad to research and see if we can get it. And many libraries do that they take requests from their public.
Okay.
They do, yeah. What about culling the books? What's your criteria to cull a book and to remove it from the circulation?
Right. So again, just to make sure everybody understands what you're asking.
Okay.
We have a finite amount of shelf space. And if we want to keep adding books, at some point, we're going to run out of shelf space. So, we just, in the library world, we call it weeding, that it's time to take some things out so that we have space and you can find some of the newer things. So some of that is just, is the book used? Is it falling apart? Is it ugly? Does it smell? Because those things happen. But it's also maybe something got checked out a lot when we had it, for the first 3 years, but now it's sat on the shelf for 7 years and nobody's touched it. So we take a look at circulation reports, and we can run different reports through our online library catalog to see what items aren't being used. And then we can make the judgment call, is that something we still need to keep or not?
Do you keep traditional things, classics, anyway?
There are some titles that no matter how little use they get, we do keep. And there are times when, a classic title just needs a new purchase because it's been so worn. There was a while, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there was a publishing company that was updating the covers, and some of those classics were looking really attractive by modern standards. And so we did buy some new copies of those classics just because they look more appealing, just the way they're packaged. So yeah, we don't get rid of everything just because it's sitting and hasn't been checked out. But that's part of why the library professionals are trained to do what they're doing, is to help us make good decisions and to be thoughtful in how we're using the public's money.
In the library offers many services nowadays versus having books available for reading. And do you know, or if in the 50s, 60s, 70s, when it started to become more of the norm for the library to branch out into what it offers?
Well, I think it was always the library's job to provide like story time for the kids, or to bring in special speakers to enrich the community's knowledge about something. I think that was always a thing. But maybe you're thinking more about, like, maybe if you needed a typewriter, you had to come to the library to use a typewriter. I know we still have a typewriter. We can't get rid of it.
Right? Oh,
we have a ribbon for it, but
you try to type on one again. Is it electric or manual?
I'm not sure.
No, you haven't had much request for it.
But when the library likes to be a place where if there's something that we can share, I think libraries are going to try and share that. So when computers, when the personal computer, not just business computers, but the personal computer became more commonplace, the libraries was where you could go to use one if you can afford one for your home. Same with internet connection. So today, you probably have a smartphone in your pocket or in your purse, but you may or may not have Wi-Fi at home. You may not be able to afford that. So the library is a place where you can connect to Wi-Fi without having to buy a sandwich or a coffee, as many stores also have Wi-Fi, but they want you to purchase if you're going to sit and use it.
Do you have author events very often?
Occasionally. And it's interesting that you ask, because I've just gotten almost an email a day from some authors saying, we do author visits.
Yes. Yeah. Are they Iowa authors or outside the state?
The most recent ones have been from within Iowa, but they're not always.
Okay.
Yeah.
So transitioning then from the 50s to now, what is the number one item that comes to mind as far as being a benefit of what has happened in this transitioning period through the years, through the 70 years since the 1950s?
Well, I think we just have a broader definition of what library service can be. So while I think most people are still coming to the library looking for books or movies or newspapers, we have just as many people coming to make copies or send a fax or print the return label for something that didn't fit right. And so I think the library as a place where we can share those resources. So not everybody needs to have a printer in their home. It is really where we're headed. We just this past year, we got blood pressure monitors from public health. And so now we circulate those. So if your doctor changes your medicine or is concerned about your blood pressure, you can borrow that from us for a few weeks and take those readings at home and report back to your doctor, what those readings look like and make decisions about your health. So that's something that we can share, and the library is the natural place to share that from.
Yes, how interesting. Well, Michelle, it's quite obvious that you haven't had to learn how to ride a horse in order to do your job.
I'm thankful for that.
Yes. And how awesome that even the idea of a library to share knowledge is even out there, is even part of our DNA, you might say, and how we have to be so grateful for, one, Andrew Carnegie, two, the pack horse librarians, and those horses who took them hither and yon, but also the extension of the purpose of a library and how it has benefited society. It's wonderful. Won't it be interesting to learn what happens in the next 50 years?
Right? Stay tuned.
Oh, yes, we will.
Okay. Well, Michelle, we do thank you so much for being our guest today. This has been wonderful. The library in our 1950s era was limited. Our exposure was limited, but oh, how nice it is to know that we have full range of whatever we need to put our fingers on for gaining knowledge.
Yep.
So we thank you very much. Jackie, how can you close us today?
I just want people to realize that they can push that red subscribe button or the blue thumbs up button, and we would appreciate it if you would do that. And until next time, tell your friends, even your relatives, about the 1950s Fun Chat. Until next time, toodaloo.
Bye-bye.